in our next video in our accessibility series, we'll start to look at the actual WCAG standards and how we can apply those standards to our courses to make sure that we are making our content as accessible as possible for our students. So first thing I wanted to show you was here on the screen. This is a version of the WCAG standards. There's a lot of them out there. I kind of like this one because not only does it give you the general guideline, but it also will run down and give you a bulleted list kind of explaining a little more about what that standard is referring to and what that means. I don't want to go and get too deep into the weeds throughout these videos looking at exactly what all of these say. The bigger focus here is on why the broader topic is important and how do we go about making sure that we're doing those things within Canvas. But I did want to show those up front just so we kind of have an idea of what we're referring to. So you'll see here we have our perceivable. As we scroll down, then we get into our operable. You'll see they're kind of broken up. All the guideline 3s are under understandable, and then the robust is all the things that are 4. Sometimes certain elements, certain things we'll talk about might cross over and cover a couple different guidelines and maybe even from different categories. But you'll see that on the slides when we look at those here right now. So first thing I'm going to talk about is the use of headings. This is probably one that gets overlooked a lot, but it's pretty easy and straightforward to do as you're building your content. This applies when you're working within Canvas. It can also apply to when you're building Word docs that you're going to turn into PDFs, things like that as well. You see there I listed out some of the bigger guidelines that headings fall on and touch on. So if you wanted to look at more of what those are and what those say, we could go from here and go back to the WCAG standards. So what does it mean? What are headings exactly? How do we use them? They are those hierarchical labels, the H1, H2, H3, that you maybe have seen before, whether it's in Canvas or Word or some other program that allow us to structure our content. So basically why it's important from the accessibility standpoint is the screen reader uses those to help users navigate quickly through content. With no headings, it becomes very disorienting and very difficult to work through, because if it's just a screen with nothing but text, the screen reader has no way to navigate through that. It just has to go through and read word for word. But if I put in subheadings, H2, and I put in maybe headings under that, H3, now as the user of the screen reader, I can go through and just jump ahead. No different than when you skim a page, you're looking for certain subheadings or topics, and then you find, okay, there's the thing I'm looking for. I want to read just this section. That's all I need right now. It's the same idea. It gives people that have some sort of visual impairment the ability to scan a page as you would. Imagine that if you had to find information, you had to start at the top of the page and read through it every single time. It'd become pretty disheartening pretty quickly. The other thing, too, is that just a general usability, regardless of the student. If things are structured well, it's just easier to scan, to understand, to go back and refresh or review on certain things. So I just want to try to piece things down into a good structure, use kind of an outline structure, so that way things can be followed along with. An example of what this might look like, and we'll show it here in Canvas as well, but I have my title, which would be my main heading of H1, and then I might have a subheading talking about text and content structure. That'd be my heading 2, and then I'd have 3 more headings for headings, lists, and links, kind of like what we're talking about here. It's heading 3. Now, obviously, I could include information in between there, but then if I knew I wanted to go back to that section on headings, I could just go through and navigate to through H3. And even then, with the headings, sometimes it's trial and error. I might have to go, is that an H2 or an H3? But I can listen to all the H2s and then realize, okay, that's probably where I want to be, and then go through and start to listen to the H3 headings. So let's flip over to Canvas and take a look at how we set that up. So I had already typed this content into our rich content editor. And sometimes in order to differentiate, what the heading and not, we want to go with what we've always done and just make it bold or underline or change the color. It's not to say that you can't do that. That is good because it gives students that can see a visual key as to when we're breaking things into smaller pieces. But what we want to do is go up here to where it usually defaults to paragraph, and I want to go ahead and click on that and make that heading 2. If I wanted this heading to be larger, I can set it to heading 2, and I can go through and change my formatting however I like. I don't have to leave it as that. It's just a matter of it puts that code in the background. If you come down here and click on your code editor, you'll see that now it has an H2 tag around it, kind of like that example we looked at in the slide. One thing to note in Canvas, the page title, when you create a page, or the assignment title or the exam title, will always be H1, and you only want to have one H1. So you think, where did that go? In the example, it had H1. I left it that way specifically to make sure I would remember to mention that. The title will always be H1, and then the first heading that you would use would be H2. So here, this would change to H3, and then these would change to H4. And then so we can include content in between, and then we could just leave that on paragraph. It knows that's just text that follows the heading. So that's how I would set that up. Looking at it in a bigger example, so this is a page that already existed that I made in a course, and you can see here H2 is the heading. I formatted it a little bit, and then everything else would qualify as paragraph until I got down to this next section that changes topics and goes into accessible documents. Then I went back to another heading 2, and then everything else has a paragraph listed there. Something else which we'll talk about more in detail, but to get in the habit of, and I noticed here that I have 7 accessibility issues. This accessibility checker, as I build, I can go through and change. And it looks like all of these are just contrast ratio. What it's telling me is my links aren't the right color. They're not. There's not enough discrepancy between the colors. So if I slid that down, I could change that a little bit. But that's a good habit to get into anytime we do accessibility stuff, is always to go through and see if it's finding any major accessibility errors. It doesn't mean that you have made everything completely accessible, but it does help pick up a lot of the big stuff. Okay, so do's and don'ts, some things that we mentioned in the video, just to kind of recap. Make sure that we only use one H1 per page. In Canvas, it's not difficult because it's going to be the module title, the page title, the assignment title. And then make sure that we always keep things in order. Don't skip headings. Don't go from 2 to 4. Make sure that we're always going in order. Make sure you're using these things to break up your content into logical sections, and that each section of content always has a descriptive heading that you can put one of those H tags on. Like I mentioned, don't just use formatting to mimic headings. Make sure that you're actually tagging them with the right content, and you'll be able to have good accessible content for your students.